Hello! If you are tuning in, you are here for building a GraphQL client in JavaScript. This is just a quick little introduction to GraphQL and how you can start building it today with a JavaScript client. So, first of all, these are actually a list of companies that are currently using GraphQL. GraphQL is massive and it's being adopted more and more widely every single day. But some of the biggest names in tech are currently using and adopting tech, and if it's not this, then very similar technologies. It's huge and super important to learn. Other thing, GraphQL is not a technology, it's a specification for how to develop an API endpoint that follows the same protocol. But this specification has been adopted by pretty much all the major programming languages that are out there today. If you can code a server with it, you can probably make a GraphQL service with it. The more you know. Did you know that stuff? I don't know. Who knows? But now you do. So I'm glad you do. So now that you know a little bit about GraphQL, who am I? Well, my name is Joe Carlson, and I work for MongoDB. Right? The place you're MongoDB Live, right? You're here right now for that. And my job is a developer advocate and a software engineer. So that means I get to help developers like you use tools better, or if there's things that you're stuck with or don't work well, I help deliver that news to the engineering teams internally. I love my job and it's amazing. It's so much fun. You'll also see a little QR code in the upper right-hand corner with a bit.ly link. If you go there, you're going to see all the resources, links, codes, demos, slides, videos, everything you need from this talk. It's all going to be available for you there. So go check that out. And it's really helpful too if you want to study it on your own time. Okay, one other important thing, at least to me, is socials. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm going to be posting these again at the end. But I am on Twitter. I also stream every Friday on the MongoDB Twitch channel, and there's my website. Lastly, if I say anything controversial here today, I just want you to know they're my opinions. They're not my employer's opinions. So please, don't get me fired if I say anything. I'm not going to say anything too controversial, but I do state some strong opinions here about using GraphQL, and I just want you to take that in mind. Cool? Okay, before we get going here, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. You guys, this is my job, and I'm so thankful. I wouldn't have it if people weren't here right now for it. So, who is this talk for, though? Most importantly, it's for you, but it's for people who are maybe you've used JavaScript, you have the basics understanding of it. It's for people who have heard of GraphQL, know it's a big thing in the industry, but you don't really know anything about it. This talk could be for people who are trying to figure out whether it's a technology they want to learn. Even if you've used GraphQL in the past, I think you might still learn some new things here that you may not know otherwise. So everyone's welcome, but that's who this talk is designed for. Okay. Let's just jump in here. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, first of all, we're going to be doing a gentle introduction to GraphQL. We're going to be talking about what it is, what problem solving it's solving, and more importantly, what it is not, when you should not use it. We'll be talking about the Apollo client and how that integrates with GraphQL and why we're using it today. We'll talk about how to make queries with GraphQL, and we're also going to be talking about mutations. So we're going to be basically doing the basics of all the CRUD operations you would have with a normal API, right? Getting, posting, putting it, updating, and deleting. I feel like I said something twice there. All right, so that's the agenda today. What is GraphQL? We're going to introduce Apollo, and we're going to show you how to make queries and mutations with GraphQL clients in JavaScript. All right, first things first. What the heck is this GraphQL thing, huh? I don't know about you, but when I was first learning GraphQL, this is kind of what I felt like, right? It's this big, scary thing. I've heard a lot about it. I know it's something to do with the REST, but it was kind of intimidating. How do you start with this thing? So I think it's helpful to understand GraphQL by kind of using a foundational standpoint. And most of us are familiar with REST endpoints, right? We have some sort of representational state API that we have /user/user1, right? User ID 1. We're pretty used to that and that's the default standard to it. But I want to talk about where the limitations with REST exist and then show how GraphQL solves those problems. So imagine with me, if you will. Let's say you have a endpoint for a service that you're working on. right? Maybe you're a front engineer and you have a service that you're getting and you want to show all the recent orders a user has made. So you pass in that user ID on this endpoint and it returns an array of SKUs. SKUs are like order or product IDs, right? Okay, cool. So we go get that data. We show that on the DOM. We show that in the web page for the user. But hold up here. Let's say we got your product manager comes to you and says, listen, Joe, no one knows what the heck a SKU is. We need to show like the hydrated items from that list, like the name, the description, maybe even the data was ordered, right? We need to show additional information from the order. So now we need to show a hydrated list of those orders for the user. But we only have that single endpoint, right? We have the endpoint for recent orders for that user, and it returns an array of product IDs. Okay, so what's the best way to get that data or update our API? There's a lot of different ways we could do that. First of all, we could make a brand new API endpoint. Maybe we just call it hydrated recent orders. Does the same thing, just returns a hydrated instance of that data. Okay. But hold up, what about just to do hydrated SKUs? We could call it something else. Or what if we did like a query string on the end or embedded something in the header, right? We can't mutate the original, right? Because other services are digesting that data. We can't change it. So we have to do something new with it. But there's no standard way for telling a REST endpoint what we need. So REST, right? Typically when we're building front-end applications, what happens is your front-end application is responsible for making several API calls to separate services, and those separate services call to separate databases, right? Sometimes you have to, maybe with a hydrated list, I get that list of SKUs and I pass a SKU through to hydrate it. Maybe I have to hydrate each one of those independently. Maybe I can pass through an array to that one. But the thing is, we are making hundreds of thousands of API calls to separate REST endpoints, and each of those REST endpoints is being implemented with different rules. Some of them have header options, query string options, separate headers, right? Documentation's all over the place. And we have to go talk to those backend teams to go get that data that we need, even for the small change. Ugh, right? That gets messy quickly, and it's hard to implement and change and scale and communicate across different teams. So, what about GraphQL? GraphQL is a little bit different. GraphQL, your front-end application makes a single API call to the GraphQL endpoint, and GraphQL goes and talks to the separate services, gathers the data it needs from those services, consolidates it, and returns it to the user. It's one standard endpoint for all applications digesting server data. It follows a single format, so you don't have separate types across it. There's no more API versioning. Everything is just, you get the data you need specifically from the endpoint, nothing more and nothing less. Okay, I said a lot of stuff there about the benefits. I want to dig in deeper into what specifically those benefits might be. So, why would we use GraphQL, right? What are the specific reasons why it's become so massively popular? I'm glad you asked. Let's go jump in. Let's go check it out. So first of all, we are making data gathering from the backend declarative. What does that mean, right? We're declaring the data we need without caring about the implementation details of how we did that. Just like how Michael Scott declared bankruptcy. Michael Scott didn't know how to declare bankruptcy, but he thought if he just declared it out loud, it would happen. And that's how things work with traditional RDBMSs and SQL, right? We don't care about the implementation details. We just say what we want, and the service returns the data we need. So what does that look like in practice? So you can see here, we are declaring the type of data we want. We have a hero, and we want to get separate data from that hero class. GraphQL returns the data we need in the format we requested it. I don't care what service it came from. I don't care what database it came from. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I just matter as a front-end engineer. I just care that I need this data to display on the DOM, and I want it in this format. Cool. GraphQL. You just go declare the data you want, and you get it back. GraphQL is capable of handling multiple collections of data, right? You can have different databases in different spots, different collections, and GraphQL is smart enough to go to the collections it needs. You don't have to care as a front-end engineer anymore, right? I just want this data. It's abstracting away the server architecture to get only the data we need in a consistent format. This part is huge too, right? We can now validate and structure our requests with schema design. We get to design the shape and content of our documents on the server and on the client. which is really helpful for validation, right? If I'm asking data in the wrong format, now your GraphQL endpoint can serve up specific error information about what you're formatting incorrectly and making sure it's the right type, and return data in the correct type that you're expecting. This is a problem in JSON in general, right? Because everything gets returned by a string, and it's up to the front end JavaScript engine to parse that JSON into the correct format, which, as we know, there are issues with doing that. But with GraphQL, that's no longer an issue. And you can see here, this is the data that it looks like here. So we get to actually define the schema now. Oh, this is incredible. With MongoDB, MongoDB can actually define the schema for you based on the structure of your applications in a MongoDB collection. I just hit the generate schema button. It queries some select data from our MongoDB collection, and boom, it goes and figures out the ideal, and that's it, right? It generated it, schema, and based on my collection, and exported out to production. It took about 15 seconds to do that whole thing. It's so smart and so easy to do. This part is huge. This is huge, right? It facilitates collaboration. It helps teams work together better. The big part for me, which we're going to talk about in just a sec, is with documentation. But if you have a bunch of different services who are handling things in different ways, it makes it so much easier to work if everything is working in a consistent way. Each of the backend teams can implement their services any way they want, but the GraphQL endpoint works to kind of clean them up, make a consistent query interface for users digesting data from the backend, which makes collaborating with backend engineers so much easier. And now, once you serve up more data on that GraphQL endpoint, the front end can query. That's available for everyone, right? You have this new endpoint, new data on there, and that's not a problem. Anyone can now digest, make queries using that data without having to do anything. I can customize exactly what I need from that GraphQL endpoint. And again, unifying all the endpoints, super helpful. I've worked for large e-commerce sites with thousands of engineers, and one of the number one problems for us was if a service went down, identifying which team it was, figuring out where the documentation was, and who to talk to and how to fix it, right? If we can unify all of the services under a single roof, it's much easier to troubleshoot back ends, and I no longer have to figure out how to use each endpoint independently. API versioning is actually a thing of the past. You've probably used API endpoints to Instagram/API/v2/user/1, right? API, or you've probably gotten emails if you're using APIs saying things like, hey, just so you know, version 2 is depreciated in 3 months, right? You have to upgrade, do blah, 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 blah. That's actually an anti-pattern in GraphQL. You can still version things, but it's considered bad practice. If you have old data, best practice is just leave it up there and then add additional GraphQL endpoints for devs to start using. That's the best practices for that. No more writing and documentation. This is huge. And it leads me to my favorite feature of GraphQL and MongoDB. So, without further ado, graphical. People never know how to say this. I hear GraphQL. It's graphical, right? So like a graphical user interface. It's a joke, right? I didn't even think I explicitly said this. MongoDB now we have a new feature that allows you to query your MongoDB data with GraphQL on part of Realm and Stitch. Right on top of that serverless interface, we create a GraphQL interface automatically for you based on your Atlas data in MongoDB. But we have GraphQL built into. So I'm actually navigating around Stitch right now, and we have graphical built right in, which basically allows you to play around with queries. And then if you look on the right there, it shows you the Documentation Explorer. So based on the data in your database, it shows you what you can query on it, what fields are available on it, and it shows you how to make those queries. And you can test that live in your browser through graphical. And again, this is all baked into MongoDB Atlas, Stitch, and Realm. It's all baked in. So I have that GraphQL endpoint set up. I'm querying my Instaposts, and I'm changing that structure on there. I can change query variables, which we'll get into in a second. But you can see in real time what that data is. And this is my favorite way. Whenever I'm using GraphQL, what I'm doing is I use graphical to make sure my GraphQL request is structured correctly and I'm getting the correct data back, and then I'll just copy pasta that into my application. Super easy, but it is incredible. It's one of my favorite parts. And the best part is, right, like before, usually what happens with documentation is each team has their own Swagger documents or a Reddit or Read API or a wiki page with documentation about how they are structuring their REST endpoint. That's gone. That's gone, right? GraphQL allows you to see a real-time view of your documentation. It's always up to date. If you're pushing new data on there, GraphQL is instantly updated with that new data. And you can view that in the Documentation Explorer instantly. This is a game changer. This is a game changer for documentation. I don't have to think about it anymore. It's updated. I will say, though, the danger you will face with this is people think it's a replacement for communication. It is not. It just makes communication easier and for everybody. But it's not a replacement for communication. And I still recommend having documentation for how to query your GraphQL endpoints. But it makes the implementation details and updating it mega easy because you don't have to think about it anymore. GraphQL, another one, super fast. But I'm going to say this with a asterisk, right? It does this. It will speed up your front-end applications a number of ways. The most important one, I think, is no longer having to do multiple round trips to get data you need. Right? We gave the example before of having the hydrated SKUs. Before, I may have to get that array of SKUs and then have to go again, make another round trip to go get additional information. And I may have to wait till multiple round trips between the server and client are complete before I render the DOM. If I could get everything I need in a single request without having to do multiple round trips, that's going to speed up your application so much faster for your clients. That's a massive performance boost that that will be immediately recognizable. Network lag is one of the slowest parts of your application. And coincidentally, database speed, which is why MongoDB is so important. But I'm going to say with an asterisk. I'm going to come back to the asterisk in just a second, because there's one other point I want to make here about speed, and that's with overfetching. If you can... Usually when I'm like displaying something on the front end, right, I just need a couple things. If I'm showing like a user profile page, I just have a couple of I need to display these 3 items on the DOM. But usually what happens is API endpoints get bloated with a bunch of data that lots of other people have requested get returned on that user profile API. And you end up getting way more data than you need. Having way more data, that you're overfetching more data than you need, slows down network performance. Basically, the more data you're trying to transfer over the wire, the slower that's going to get. If you can only send over the smallest possible package of what you need to display on the DOM, that's going to speed up network performance for you. No more round trips. Oh, I went through this. Yeah, no more round trips. Great. Oh, finally we get to go to the asterisks. And this is a point I think front-end developers forget. Developers in general forget. But the asterisk is abstraction always adds performance cost. GraphQL is an abstraction layer on top of your service endpoints, your REST endpoints. Anytime you add any sort of abstraction layer, that's additional code that you have to go through in order to get something to work that cannot be abstracted away further, right? I think the most important thing people forget with is like React. React, Vue, and Angular, they can speed things up with the virtual DOM. But that abstraction layer, that initial load time of your browser loading in that library, that's a performance hit you have to hit. That initial load, you cannot abstract that away. Abstraction of any kind always adds performance cost, and it's usually at the front when it's loading it. You do see that we get a huge performance cost with network lags and other stuff in there, but it's up to you to weigh the costs of the initial abstraction lag that you get for the humongous benefits you get on top of that. Bottom line, GraphQL makes working with data extremely easy. It makes working with data so much easier. If it's consistent, the same, unifies everything, it's so much easier to work with that data. Oh, okay, great. So what is GraphQL? This is what we covered, right? This little introduction. First thing we did here was we compared REST endpoints to GraphQL, right? We had those multiple round trips, and GraphQL is a single endpoint that goes and gets that data for us. We talked about why we should use GraphQL, and we talked about its being declarative. We just declare the data we need. We don't care about the implementation details of where that comes from. We talked about how it's validated and structured using a schema design, and we talked about how you can generate a schema automatically with MongoDB Atlas. We talked about how it facilitates collaboration by unifying all API endpoints. We talked about how you no longer have to write documentation because GraphQL exists now, which is amazing, my favorite feature. You don't have to version APIs anymore. And bottom line, it just makes working with data ridiculously easy. Super easy, right? Whew. Okay, so we talked about what is GraphQL. We got 40 minutes left here, so I want to get through the Apollo client here, and then we get to the most important part, the queries and the mutations. So I think it's helpful to talk about something practical, right? Talking about new tech at abstract layer is great, but I think it's hard to kind of grasp what it looks like unless we can see some code. My personal philosophy is too, if you see too much code, typically people's eyes start to glaze over, so I don't want to get to that point, but we will be jumping in some practical code bases. If you want to follow along with the real code, again, there's the QR code and the bit.ly link, so you should for sure go check those out. But I'm basically going to be building a Instagram clone, right? We're going to be doing some basic CRUD operations, get, posts, puts, and deletes via GraphQL. So you can see this is the actual final product using GraphQL. We're going to be posting a brand new image of Jake the dog on there. And boom, there he is. Done. Easy, right? And then we can delete it, we can update it, delete it. This is a great project to clone, fork, and play around with if you're brand new to GraphQL and MongoDB. All right, so what does this project look like? Well, it's actually hosted 100% in the cloud. There's no server. We're using a GraphQL serverless endpoint built with Stitch and Realm on MongoDB Atlas. And our data is going to be hosted in a MongoDB collection. On our client, we're going to be using React, and we're going to be using Apollo client on top of that. So, only thing that we don't know here is Apollo. So I want to do just a quick little introduction to Apollo. Apollo was actually birthed from the ashes of the Meteor project, which I miss dearly, but God bless them. But so what is Apollo, and what the heck does it have to do with GraphQL? So Apollo is actually a UI wrapper that can wrap any front-end framework, Angular, Vue, or React. We're going to be using React today. But you pass through your queries to Apollo, and Apollo goes and makes that request for you on your behalf for your GraphQL data. It simplifies that query process, which I'll be showing you in a second. Then Apollo takes the data you need back from the endpoint, parses it, and it automatically can update state for the components. You'll see that working with stateful components, it's so much easier. It has a bunch of built-in state methods that allows it. You'll see. It's amazing. If you're new to GraphQL, I actually recommend using Apollo. It makes it so much easier. I tried doing this talk at first, just using raw JavaScript, and you have to do a lot of work on your own to get it working. Apollo makes it so much easier. As I said, it makes working with GraphQL much easier. I very much recommend it. So, what does that actually look like? Let's set it up. So we're just using Apollo and the Apollo Boost frameworks. All we have to basically do is tell it. Well, we have to authenticate because with MongoDB GraphQL endpoints, we have to authenticate. All requests need to be authenticated. I'm using anonymous login or anonymous authorization, but we need to pass those authorization token in the headers, right? So GraphQL, you can certainly do authentication on data or hide data from users. But the interesting part's at the bottom. So the only thing we have to tell Apollo is where the GraphQL URL is, right? Because Apollo, or with GraphQL, you have a single API endpoint. And with MongoDB, we generate the endpoint for you. So you're just passing through the stitch ID of wherever your GraphQL endpoint is after enabling it, and boom, that's it. And then we instantiate a brand new client by passing through that link in there. You also see on the bottom there, we also have a cache. The cache basically means that we can persist data on the client so that we don't have to go, if another React component's requesting data, it'll look in the cache first to see if that data exists, and then it'll go make a request on the data. So it could get some even more performance benefits that you wouldn't get out of the box with GraphQL. Okay, so we've instantiated a brand new Apollo client. So now we want to hook it into React. And it's got a React hook package that you can just pull from. This is going to look very similar if you've ever used Redux before. But all we're doing is we're passing that client that we instantiated as a wrapper around our React component. That way that all the children components have access to all of the hooks that we have as a part of our Apollo provider. Right? Just like the Redux, if you wrap your application with the Redux store, all the children components have access to all the Redux methods and all the Redux store itself. In this instance, we're giving access to those Apollo GraphQL interface. Okay, so Apollo, we just did a quick introduction. We introduced the Insta posts, and we're building it with MongoDB Atlas and GraphQL, and Apollo and React. Again, no server. It's an entirely serverless application with just a serverless backend in the cloud and then a front-end application statically hosted. We talked about Apollo and how it is a wrapper for your front-end applications that makes working with GraphQL so much easier. And then we went through how to set up an Apollo client with Atlas and GraphQL. All right. Whew. We're doing pretty good here. We got 30 minutes left. And I want to talk now about actually making this application. So with anything, usually with the easiest thing to do is just getting some data. So how does that work? First of all, you should mention here that MongoDB Atlas automatically generates your schema, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it automatically generates it. It generates all of the CRUD operations you typically have out of the box. You can see here all the queries. We can query a single Insta post or multiple Insta posts, and it shows you all the data there. I'm going to wait for this to loop one more time. Yeah, the mutation. There we go. So you can see it's delete one, delete many, insert one, replace one, right? We have all the CRUD operations you're used to using just generated out of the box. Once you've generated that schema, MongoDB will generate everything else for you. Super easy, right? I don't have to build these anymore. It knows based on the data of what I have in there, what I want to do with it. We can, of course, update and modify these, but out of the box, right, one button. Click the generate schema, generate GraphQL endpoint, boom, we're done. That's it. That's it. It's so easy. So you can see here we can structure the queries, but I think it's helpful to break down what that query actually looks like. So if you want to actually make a query, first thing you want to do is it's declarative. We're just telling it what we want. But the first thing we need to tell GraphQL is whether we're making a query or a mutation. Query is just anything that's read-only. We just want to read that data. And a mutation is any updates, insertions, or deletions. Since we're just going to be retrieving data, we're making a query. And then we need to tell it what we are going to be querying. And in this instance, I want an array of posts. I want all of the posts that we're posting in there, all of those Instagram photos. Then the third thing we need to do is tell it what we need in here. What kind of data do we want to return back? I can have as much or as little as this as possible, but I will get the data back in this format. Okay, so that's what it looks like, but how does it actually get implemented with React and Apollo and GraphQL? I'm so glad you asked. Let's go jump in. So how does this work? We're again going to be using the React hooks, and out of the box, Apollo gives you a use query tool. The other one I want you to notice here is that third line, that GraphQL or the GQL, the GraphQL tag. This allows you to structure your GraphQL queries in a string literal in the store, which is amazing, right? I want to show you that looks. So what I do is I just copy pasta from GraphQL. That query I've identified works. I just paste that right in there and boom. And it's inside of a string literal. And then you can pass that string literal through to the use query function from the React hooks, which I'll show you here. So I'm just saying we're going to be using the query, using that GraphQL tag, and then it gives you three states: the loading, error, and data state. You'll also notice optionally I pass through that polling interview. So every half a second, it's going to poll that endpoint for new updates. And then I can render React components based on the state of that hook, if it's loading, error, or data. And I can pass that data as we get it back. And that's it, right? We're just structuring that query. I pass it through to Apollo, right? It makes it working with those GraphQL queries super easy. And then I just handle the state, one of the three states it could be in. Either it's in process, it errored out, or it succeeded. And we do something with it. That's it, though. That's it. That's it. Let's take a look at what that looks like in process. So remember, we had that poll interval. So you can see here in the network, you can actually see it polling every half a second. And you can see that data getting returned back in the structure that we requested it in. We have an array of data in that structure. You can see this in real time in network. You can look at the request. You can see the headers, the parameters here. You can see all the data that we requested in the format we wanted on the front end. with that code. It's super easy. It's incredible. Yes, I love this GIF. I love it. We're doing great here. Okay, so queries. Queries are pretty easy. All right, but let's do a quick review. So first thing we talked about was how MongoDB automatically generates all of your queries and all of your CRUD operations in GraphQL out of the box. When you do your GraphQL schema, MongoDB Atlas automatically generates all of the schemas you need out of it. You can customize if you need to, but it's one click and you're ready to go, right? You're done, baby, you're done. If you got your data in Atlas, generate your schema, boom, you've got a GraphQL endpoint that you can start querying instantly. That's incredible. This has been a total game changer for how I'm personally building applications. I very rarely these days develop a server. I'm typically using serverless applications, and I have MongoDB generate my GraphQL endpoint on top of that. And I'm just developing front-end applications that digest that GraphQL data. That's how I'm building most of my applications these days. Okay, the next thing we talked about was how to structure a GraphQL query. We talked about how you need to tell it whether it's a query or a mutation. Then we need to tell it what you want to query. And then you want to tell it what data you want from that query. You can do many different types of data in here. You can do, right? But you need to define what data you want to get returned from that endpoint. And then we showed you how to actually hook up a GraphQL query with Apollo and React. And we showed you GraphQL tag, and then we showed you the React hooks that are built into Apollo. So that use query React hook, and we pass through the GraphQL tag, find all Insta posts, and it returns 3 states, loading, error, or data states. And we render React components based on the state of that query. Whoo! All right, that looks great. All right. This one's a big one, right? Mutations covers a lot of stuff here. So we're going to try our best to get through this, but mutation data, I want to just make a statement before we go further here. If this is feeling overwhelming or whatever, please reach out to me. And mutations would be a little tricky, right? And generally speaking with conference talks, I don't expect you to be an expert at GraphQL from listening to me talk about something. I expect you to be an expert at GraphQL once you've done it yourself. Use this presentation and my starter project as a place to get started with your next GraphQL endpoint. Mutation's a little fun. It's a little more challenging, but we'll try our best to get through it. But if it feels uncomfortable, weird for you, that's totally fine. I still believe in you, and I know you can figure this out. Okay, so same thing, right? I want to go through constructing a GraphQL mutation. I will note this is slightly different than constructing a query, and we're going to be going through those differences here. But first thing we want to do is define whether it is a mutation or a query. Obviously, we're doing mutations here, so we're going to define it as a mutation. Second thing we want to do, you can optionally give an operation name. Think of operation names as like a function name. You can have anonymous functions in JavaScript, not a problem, but giving function names describes what it does. And for a typical application, you're going to be making lots and lots of different kinds of operations, right? Different, like creating, updating, posting, deleting, whatever you need to do. But it helps you organize as a human being all of your different GraphQL queries your application could possibly be making. Okay, so we have a name, operation name. Next thing we have is arguments. So these arguments allow you to pass query variables through to your application, just like you would have with arguments in a JavaScript function or a function in any language. For example, with these ones, we need to pass through data for these mutation. We need to pass through like what the description of that image is. We have to pass through that URL and any other additional information the server might need in order to make a brand new instance of that post. So that's where we're going to be passing through that input. I want to call out here, though, there's a bang on the end of it, which I think is kind of cool. The bang means that is a required argument. You can make arguments optional if you want. This one's going to be required, right? I can't create something unless you give me the correct input to make that brand new post. All right, so this one's the type, the mutation type. So remember when I showed you that schema when it defined all of our GraphQL operations? This I just pulled straight from one of those auto-generated mutations created by us from MongoDB Atlas GraphQL schema designer, right? So I just pulled the insert one instapost. There's the insert many, there's a place one, right? But I'm just, for this one, we're doing a single instapost creation. So insert one instapost. And this instance, or this argument from mutation from MongoDB that automatically got generated has arguments that need to be passed through. Those are defined in GraphQL, or graphical, excuse me. All right. Next thing, you can define what data you want returned back, right? This is like the confirmation you get from that server. So once I've inserted it, I'm saying, hey, GraphQL endpoint, can you send me this data back? Just saying, like, I think it was a receipt. I want this data back once this operation has been completed. So I don't have to make a separate query after the data has been done, right? One round trip to send all the data I want, and then to get all the data I want back from that operation. And here we go with our, this is a great one if you want to do a little screenshot here, but kind of breaks down how to generate a mutation. I'm going to be honest, this part took me a long time to grok personally. The queries and arguments was kind of a struggle for me, but it took me a while to figure out, but it's fine. So let's go through how this looks. There's a little bit more code with me here, but this is the most codey part of the entire talk, so bear with me. But you'll notice here we have the same thing we're pulling in before, right? We're using that Apollo React hooks function, but instead of using use query, we're using use my mutation. And again, we're going to be using that GraphQL tag to generate those GraphQL queries with a string literal in JavaScript. So I'm going to define a new one, add instaposts, and we're going to pass the exact mutation that we just defined in the last step, where I'm just copy pasting that from GraphQL into my application. I know that works. I tested it out. Cool. Copy pasta. So next thing we want to do, we have our React React component. Create page. This is where we're going to be creating a brand new Insta page. And I'm passing through that GraphQL tag into the use method React hook. And you can see here that I have a form, and when the form gets on submit, I'm invoking the use mutation method, or React hook, and I'm going to pass through the data from that form to use. So I have the variables and the data, and then pass through the description and image URL from the form. And that's it. That's it, right? So it's a method that gets invoked when we want to create something. And in this instance, we're just having it be passed through as form data into our application. Woo, right? And that hook will go and send that data off to our GraphQL endpoint via Apollo. Apollo does all that magic for us. And boom, it works. So let's see what that actually looks like. I love looking at the network logs to see what that looks like. So on new post here, right, we have the create page React form, and I'm entering all the data, the image URL and description. And then I'm looking in the network to see if I can find that. There it is, create post. So you can see that data, that create post, and it's passing that data through to my endpoint, right? You can see it's being passed down through that endpoint to GraphQL. Amazing. Oh, boy. This blows my mind. It makes it so much easier. It makes it, and this is just a little demo project. I've worked on large scale projects using GraphQL, and it makes massively, so it works amazing for small projects. It works amazing for large projects. I'm a huge fan. So let's say, hypothetically, after this talk, I've somehow inspired you to want to learn GraphQL. How the heck does one go about doing this? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I get asked questions like this all the time, like, hey, Joe, how do I learn XYZ tech? How do I learn blah, blah, blah? How do I learn GraphQL? And I've heard this isn't useful advice, but I think it's useful to tell you how I solve problems, right? And that's just doing it. I just go and build it. I recommend, if you haven't been inspired at all by this talk and want to learn what it's about, next time you build a project, just use GraphQL. Every time I build a new project, I try to use at least one new piece of tech so I can understand how to use that. I'm always trying to learn something new, and the way I do that is by trying that piece out. And I will Google the shit out of that problem every time I get stuck. I will say, I have a list of resources at the end here. The MongoDB GraphQL documentation is incredible, and the official GraphQL websites is also a great resource for how to do this too, and there's a ton of tutorials. If I would also recommend you take that coding project, my Instapost project, and I want you to actually clone that and play around with it yourself, or try to rebuild it from scratch. I think it's what I typically do is I get a working demo working, and I will start adapting it based on the needs of my application. Everything has been fully documented in the README for my project on GitHub, so you for sure should check that out. But I'm going to say it again. Just do it. Pick out a piece of tech you want to build. Pick out some stupid side project you want to do, and just go home and try it out. Google every time you get stuck. Learning new things is an essential component of being in tech, and I think that this is a good way to practice how to learn new things. If you're lucky enough to be able to experiment with it at work, I say go for it, or to try to get it in on your next project. I think it's a good safe bet. Okay, whew. So I want to do just a recap of everything we've done here. So first thing we talked about today is we just did what is GraphQL? Why is it important? And we first compared it to REST endpoints, because that's what most of us are comfortable with. And we talked about the pros and cons of using a REST endpoint and how GraphQL solves problems implemented or that are part of REST. We talked about why you should be using it. So the key features are it being declarative. And we talked about Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy. He doesn't know how that works, but he just declares what he wants and expects to get that back. GraphQL actually works like that, right? You can just get the data that you're requesting back in the form that you're requesting it from. We talked about how it's validated and structured. And you can define the BSON types for those backend. Which, by the way, did you know that BSON is a structure developed and maintained by MongoDB? We invented it for because we don't store things in JSON documents. We store them in BSON documents so we can type them. Okay. We also talked about how it facilitates collaboration. And I have a lot to say about this, but we talked about how it unifies all endpoints and makes digesting data from a server much easier by unifying the way that you get that data, regardless of where the data comes from. We talked about how you no longer have to write documentation, which is, I'll say that with an asterisk, but with GraphQL, your documentation is auto-generated for you. Note, this is not a replacement for communication. We talked about how API versioning is now considered an anti-pattern in GraphQL. You can have it, you can version stuff, you can restrict stuff, but it is considered an anti-pattern and you should be avoiding it at all costs. You keep the old data endpoint, you add new data, and you leave it alone. Lastly, it just makes working with data super easy. It just makes working with data so much easier, especially on massive applications with tons of different backend services. It makes it so much easier. Okay. And we talked about Apollo. So we talked about what it is, and we first introduced my Instagram posts project, right? We built that using MongoDB with a new GraphQL serverless endpoints built in Stitch and Realm, and then we're using React and an Apollo wrapper around my React application. We talked about how Apollo works and how it's a wrapper, and it doesn't matter which front-end framework you're using, but it wraps your application and makes working with GraphQL data ridiculously easy. Then we showed you how to set up your own GraphQL Atlas, Apollo and React application, and all you're doing is passing through the single GraphQL endpoint auto-generated by MongoDB as a link point to your Apollo application. And that's really it. I have some caching on there for the speed of performance, but that's about it. Then we connected that Apollo application to React. And all we do is we wrap our React application with the Apollo provider, so we have access to all the data and hooks from Apollo. All the children components have access. So then we talked about queries. How do we make a query? So fun. MongoDB automatically generates all the queries you need, all the CRUD operations out of the box. Once you generate your schema for your application, MongoDB takes care of the rest. Incredible. We talked about how to actually make that query from scratch. We talked about how you have to define whether it's a query or mutation. You have to tell it what you want to query, and then you get to declare what data you want returned from that data type. Then we showed you how to actually pass that through, right? We're using the useQuery Apollo React hook. We're passing through that graphical tag string literal, and then we just handle the data as states, the loading error data states, and render React components accordingly. Mega easy. That's super easy. Then we talked about mutation. And we only talked about how to do insertions. Totally fine. We just don't have time to do the others today, but it's the same deal, right? But we first talked about how to construct a GraphQL mutation. The key differences here are you have to define it's a mutation instead of a query, and you generally need to pass through arguments. Well, I mean, you pretty much have to, right? If you're deleting something, you have to tell it what to delete. If you're updating, you have to tell it what thing you want to update, and then what the new data is, right? You have to do some sort of data pass through with a mutation. But that's the key differences, right? So otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. Then we talked about how to make a mutation using Apollo and React. So we use the use mutation Apollo React hook, and we invoke that method or that function on submit of that form, or whenever you want to make that mutation. So this is the insert or create new post page, and I have a form on there, and when I hit submit on that form, I invoke the use mutation function and pass that data through to my GraphQL endpoint to make the appropriate changes. Oh baby. So obviously this is pre-recorded, but I should be in chat right now. Or if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, you can see my Twitter handle in the lower right-hand corner. I'd love to talk about anything JavaScript, React, Node, any programming. It doesn't matter. Your shoes, whatever you want to talk about. I'm game. I'd love it. I just chat. Yeah, reach out. I'd love to chat about it. All the resources in this talk, including slides, video of this recording, and code, and a bunch of the resources we'll talk about here in just a second, are available here on this bit.ly link or in that QR code. Oh, quick change here. I can give you $100 in free Atlas credits if you use the code JOEK100. That old code. This code does not work anymore. I'm so sorry. But if you go to that bit.ly link, it has all the updated information that you need. And if you have feedback about this talk, I'd love to see that. I'd love to hear it. All the data's here. I'd love to hear if it's good, bad, you learned something, you didn't learn something. I don't know. Tell me that. But lastly, I just want to say thank you for coming. I appreciate you so much. Y'all are the best. Here's my information again one more time. Best way to get a hold of me is via Twitter. Please reach out to me. I would love to chat with you. I don't know. I just love meeting new people. So it'd be great. And here's some more resources too. Source code. The API docs, which are incredible. You should check them out. The official docs. And if you want to play around with GraphQL without setting anything up, GraphQLHub.com is a great place to go. I would totally check that out. Otherwise, that's it for me. Thank you so much for coming, y'all. I had so much fun chatting with you, and I can't wait to see what you build with GraphQL. Talk to you later. Goodbye.